A note for tonight's show before we begin. My segment does cover triggering topics such as abuse, body harm, trauma, all recounted by former patients at Central State Hospital. Listener discretion is advised. For over 150 years, the west side of Indianapolis was the home of Central State Hospital, intended to care and help for individuals with mental psychosis throughout the Hoosier state. The institution's history lives on in the collections at the Indiana Medical History Museum and the countless ghost stories retold about the abandoned hospital. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Hometown Haunts podcast. I'm your host, Kat Loco, and along with me in this endeavor into the endless mysteries around the world are my friends Christina Wald and Jen
Hey,
Wheeler. Yeah, hi.
Hello.
Yeah. It's really cold where all of us are right now. What is it, 9 degrees Fahrenheit where you are in Cincinnati?
yes.
Oof.
It feels so good.
Yeah, it's single digits. Here it's 31 and snowing. So, I'm just waiting to see a mountain lion in my backyard.
Well, yeah, those pictures of the bobcats were cool.
Yes. Yes, those, I do love my neighbors. I guess I don't know if they just always happen to see the bobcats outside in our lawn or if they just watch out the window all day. I'm not sure which one it is, or they have a camera that alerts them. But I get warnings from them of, "Hey, there's a bobcat in your yard. Don't let your dogs out."
Oh,
And I
well, that's
appreciate
nice.
it because
Yeah.
poor Mickey, who is blind and deaf,
Yeah.
would be just food for him. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so she's a little big, but we do have coyotes around here. There we have bobcats. This is the second one, and then there is a confirmed mountain lion sighting 2 blocks away from me. So, yeah, this is one of and then, of course, there's the bears. There's a family of bears that live in the cemetery next to my house. So,
That sounds like a children's book.
It does. Or
I would write, "Oh, the the family of bears in the cemetery next to my house." Only macabre families would buy that.
yeah.
What would
There's a
be the
lot of them out
Which is a
there.
lot of people, I
That is
think,
true.
would
Yeah.
really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could be whimsical. I mean, come on, the Three Little Bears story. How is that not horrifying? And many,
Right?
That is true.
I
That
mean,
is
there are
true.
some versions where they eat Goldilocks.
Well, they should. She was an intruder,
That's
Mhm.
true. That's true.
stealing their food,
Have you seen
sleeping
the
in their
recent
beds.
Puss in Boots movie?
No.
I've heard
Oh,
it's really good.
it is very good, and the Goldilocks and the 3 bears are in it,
Oh,
and it's a very good version of their family. So, yeah,
I
go
do
see that.
like
Yeah.
that character.
I will. My students told me it was really good, and I should watch it, and I haven't yet.
Oh, it was very good. I yeah. That and Elemental, which also was very
Oh,
good. It's a
yeah.
Disney movie. So,
Cool. So,
yeah.
so we're segueing from Disney to
Yeah, well,
trigger
news
warnings and
first for all of our listeners. You can join us at Frogman Festival 2024 on March 2nd in Loveland, Ohio. I believe will all 3 of us be there?
I'll be
Yes.
there.
I plan on
Okay,
being
so
there.
all
Yep.
3 of us will be there. And, we are Corpse Flower Press, which is the publishing company that I run, is debuting an all-new comic book, Frogman Funnies, written
Woohoo.
and compiled by Tim Fuller. So people will recognize Tim. He is the art director for the Cabinet of Curiosities comics anthology. So
And
he
also, Mark Muncy is going to be there. He and Carrie are going to be there. They have a table.
yay, that's great. Yeah, it's we're slowly finding out who's going to be there and all the different friends. Friend of the show, James Willis, will be there doing a talk as well,
Oh.
and he is the author of one of my sources tonight.
Ooh,
So
good
it
segue.
was just like,
Yeah.
wow. So for tonight's show, we are traveling just a hop, skip, and a jump to the next state over, which is Indiana, where I grew up, and to Central State Hospital. Are you familiar with Central State Hospital at all? No.
Christine has told me about it. I do believe she has visited the museum there,
Wow.
the
Yeah,
medical museum.
The medical museum is one of the places that was on my I need to go do this list, and I
Mhm.
never did before leaving.
Yeah.
So I am kicking myself now. And it's wonderfully kept. The docents there and the director are very knowledgeable about all parts of the museum. Watched a lot of interviews of them today in the past few days while doing the research for tonight's show. And I'm really glad of what their mission is doing, bringing back a lot of the patient stories,
Mm.
which, as an anthropologist, we kind of lose those stories, and a lot of us now are trying to put them back together. Those more authentic stories from the people who lived and worked in the property instead of just hearing the ghost stories and lore surrounding it.
Mhm.
There was a lot that happened at this place. It has a very long history, and there is trigger warnings. There is body harm that is mentioned by one of the previous patients there, and there is lots of abuse. This is one reason why Central State doesn't exist anymore,
Mm.
is because of that, and money. So on to tonight's episode. So the sources for tonight are the Indianapolis Star, which is the newspaper there, the Indiana Medical History Museum, indiana.gov, Weird Indiana by Mark Merriman, James Willis, and Troy Taylor, Wikipedia, Haunted Indiana 3 by Mark Merriman, and the documentary Central State Asylum for the Insane by Dan T. Hall and Vismo Films. And I will say, watching this documentary sent me back to my early ghost hunting days in Indiana in 2008. So I was like,
Wow.
I know a lot of these people, and it was it was like watching your high school yearbook like unfold in front of you, and you're just like, wow, I know all these people, and they're all on camera. And okay, so sitting in the center of Indianapolis, Indiana, once stood the immense campus of the Central State Hospital. Although started with the best of intentions, Central State has a long and twisted history filled with trauma and cruelty. A trigger warning for all of our listeners, just like at the start of this show, who find stories of abuse difficult to hear. I'll be reading reports from the past patients and staff, and what they report is quite devastating. As early as 1827, the Indiana state legislature set authorized funds and land for the establishment of the Hospital for the Insane. However, construction was delayed for nearly 20 years. The Indiana Hospital for the Insane was opened in November of 1848. Its purpose was for the treatment and housing of people in psychiatric distress throughout the state of Indiana. When it opened, the hospital consisted of one brick building on over 100 acres of wooded land and had a total of 5 patients. I don't know how many doctors. For the first 100 years of its history, the Indiana Hospital for the Insane continuously grew in both scale and the number of patients admitted. By 1948, the hospital had seen a name change to Central State Hospital, dropping the for the insane bit in 1927, and we will refer to it as just Central State from here on out. Two Gothic dormitory buildings were constructed for male and female patients. The female dormitory was known as Seven Steeples, and it was laid out in the Kirkland plan style of architecture common for mental institutions and prisons. A pathology department building where autopsies were conducted to find a cause for the patient's mental illnesses. Superintendent George F. Edenharter was responsible for the construction. A sick hospital for physical ailments, a farm for patients to exert occupational therapy, an amusement hall complete with a bowling alley, billiards, and an auditorium, gardens and fountains, a cannery staffed by patients, a firehouse, I'm going to say hopefully not staffed by patients, a powerhouse, a chapel, a cafeteria, and finally a cemetery in the northwest side of the property, which still stands today. All of these were connected in a web like tunnel system except the cemetery. All tunnels were accessible from the administration building, which was built in 1938. Tunnels were wide enough for a gurney and also were the location for both the water pipes and underground electrical grid and any gas pipes. So, really, it wasn't meant for gurneys to go through, although service trolleys could go through, like little hand carts that could go. It was for maintenance people to be able to go to and fro and fix things as needed. It wasn't like the body shoots that you hear about from Waverly Hills or many of the other institutions, the tuberculosis institutions, because they weren't necessarily trying to hide the bodies. That wasn't happening here. But one of the urban legends was that's what these were for. And no, they were just utility tunnels. And so Indiana does get cold. The staff just wanted to make sure they were kind of warm when they were walking through. I mean, it's 9 degrees outside. It gets chilly. So controversy swirled around Central State in 1884 when Civil War veteran Albert Thayer published an expose about his time in the hospital after he was discharged. Thayer was appalled by the terrible treatment of himself and other patients while at Central State, and he was one of the few who managed to leave the hospital. He encouraged other patients who managed to get out as well to write about their own experiences there. This later became the publication known as the Indiana Crazy Horse. The following year, when Superintendent William Fletcher was fired from his position, he was fired for knowingly destroying mechanical restraints in a bonfire in 1883. Fletcher was an advocate for public health. Oh my goodness. Fletcher was a advocate for public mental health, and he was renowned for abolishing physical restraints at the hospital while he was a superintendent. In the bonfire, he burned straitjackets, covered cribs, restrainment chairs, and other restrainment contraptions. He also opposed staff appointments influenced by the local politics. Due to overcrowding in Central State Hospital, new hospitals were built across the state. Evansville was built in 1890, that is in the southwest corner of the state. Logansport in 1888, which is the northwest or northern side of the state. Madison in 1910 in the southeast, and Richmond in 1890. Richmond, Indiana in 1890. Central State is the only. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Central State then served only the 38 counties in the central area of Indiana. More hospitals have been built since then. Out of all these original hospitals built in the early 20th century and late 19th century, only Central State has been permanently closed and now raised. The term insane, of course, was rather broad, and patients who were admitted ranged from those suffering from emotional distress, those with dementia, schizophrenia, to the criminally insane. And now, I will say for all of our listeners, skip 30 seconds if you don't want to hear graphic details of some psychosis that took place. Jen and Christina, I am sorry. There was one woman who was there when I was a patient, and she would torture herself, says a former patient interviewed for the documentary, whose name was redacted for his privacy. They would have to remove pins and needles from her legs. She would force them up underneath her skin. So this poor woman was doing that. Common treatments for patients were placing them into straitjackets, cold water baths, and confinement in cages or crates, and isolation. Shock therapy and lobotomies were also performed on some patients, as it was trendy as a procedure to do on patients in the early 20th century. Patient neglect was also very common, leaving patients in the rooms without supervision for hours to days on end. Living in the dormitories for patients meant sleeping on straw mattresses, inadequate heat or ventilation in their rooms, leaking roofs, little to no fresh water. Once admitted to the hospital, it was rare for patients to ever be discharged, and they spent their entire lives on the hospital campus. Those deemed criminally insane were housed in separate facilities from the general population. They generally had tighter security, and physical restraints were often used on them. The aides who worked with the patients were not as well trained as the doctors and psychiatrists who actually were with them or visiting them occasionally, and nurses who worked with the patients. It didn't pay well, and there's a lot of turnover, even to this day, with aides who work in these institutions. And I can speak from personal experience here. The pay is not great, and the turnover is very high, which means there is a lot of abuse that can happen, even in this historical context. Many times, the inadequate care was the cause of overpopulation in these wards, with staff who would have to take care of dozens of patients by themselves. So, one reason why isolation happened, as in the case with Penhurst, was that you would have one staff member for 20 to 50 patients, and isolation and restraints were used so that they can actually just manage to take care of everyone during their shift. And as soon as they were done taking care of everyone, they had to go around and do it again. I can see where burnout would be very common. So staff and aides may have started with the best of intentions, but stress, frustration, and overwork would very quickly cause these people to lash out. That did happen. And the hospital throughout its history was chronically underfunded and understaffed for the proper treatment of all of its patients. Patients did occasionally manage to slip away from their caretakers. Sometimes those patients would hurt themselves or others, as mentioned in the documentary. One time, you used to be able to see the fountain at the front of the building. There's one that's still there in the front of Evans' building that's covered with bushes. There was a patient who died out in the fountains, reports a former staff member in the Central State documentary. Another incident recounted where a violent attack between patients took place. In a manic episode, an escaped patient bludgeoned another patient to death with a rock in the front grove of trees. The grove was a common hangout place for patients to congregate while being supervised. The former staff member recounts in this documentary there was actually two that I knew, as in ghosts, patients who had died out there. When I would go to check the grounds at night when I was a supervisor, I would see the shadows move. That just kind of scared me. From the same location, visitors have encountered the shrieking ghost that haunts the central tree grove. Patients in white gowns have also been reported to be seen still walking in the area, as well as mumbling. This is starting to sound a lot like the old asylum that Cincinnati had that was completely razed to the ground, and groundskeepers have seen ghosts of the old patients and nurses and staff floating about 6 feet off the ground where the old floor was. So this is very similar to that particular report. The administration building reportedly had a lot of energy left inside it. Psychics who visited the property would report feeling like spirits were constantly going in and out of the building, and some have reported oppressive feelings and vortexes in the building, which makes its current use very interesting. I would sit there by myself, being the midnight shift, when everything was closed and I'd hear doors shut. I was in one room relaxing and heard a woman in heels clunk, clunk, clunk walk down up to the glass. I jumped up and I looked, and there was no one there. When I was standing there looking, I heard her walk away, reports a former groundskeeper who worked on the property after it closed in 1994. When I started working here, I never believed in ghosts, he says. The upper floors of the administration building, uh, people reported always feeling icky. And yeah, said a former employee. The second floor of the administration building was also where examinations of patients were carried out. There was this one guy who didn't want to be bothered by anyone, so he would draw these satanic type of illustrations. One was like a bull, but with a face that looked real demonic. The eyes did, said a former patient in the documentary. And they actually had film of this patient painting what this bull looked like. And to me, it looked like a really weird rendition of the Chicago Bull logo, but um, it was clearly a bull because it had long horns and everything. But sure, if you're trying to scare off people and be left alone, drawing satanic looking things is a way to do it, I guess. That's me editorializing. The cafeteria was another meeting place for patients. Electronic voice phenomena were often recorded here while the building stood. Cold spots and hot spots were recorded there by paranormal groups who were permitted to go ghost hunting there. In the powerhouse basement, apparitions have been reported walking through the tunnel system there, banging on pipes, and sometimes assaulting workmen. In one account, a workman was in the tunnels and suddenly felt as if he was being choked by a spirit. When he was later examined, it was found he had deep red marks around his neck with no explanation. Again, the powerhouse is another place where paranormal investigators have recorded EVP. And there's also a phantom who liked to turn the boiler on and off. In one of the new buildings, Evans Building, It One of the interviewees said it was a place where patients had been and some of the worst places. There were all these back rooms where they kept the real elderly. There was this one woman who had this real witchy, real haunting kind of laugh. We would walk down the hallways and always hear that, as in the laugh. And this was recounted by a former patient who lived there in the Evans building at the time. EVPs of this laugh have been recorded in the Evans building. And the Evans building is also where the quiet rooms were, the isolation rooms where patients could be put in there for up to a week. Feelings of being watched are common in this area. Please excuse the sound of my dogs scratching the door trying to get inside. And then finally, we have the tunnels. It was rumored that in the 1950s, when remodeling was being done on the original Victorian buildings, construction workers found dark rooms in the underground passages where chains and shackles were still bolted to the stone walls. The tunnels under the women's dormitory were where patients were put into isolation. Sometimes you could hear the chains rattling where people were put into isolation even though no one was there. The tunnel from administration to Evans was another location of chains and shackles for patients. I saw a woman wearing a white skirt and a red cape one time when I was taking a patient from Bolton to Evans, recounts a former attendant, an employee of the hospital. In the 1990s, when he worked, no one wore that uniform. He goes on to say, the ghost is known as the Red Lady, and legend has it that she was a nurse who used to do ground checks. She died in an accident in the old main building, which is the women's dormitory, and it was about 20 years before they tore it down, and she would wear red capes. And if you saw her, you were going through the tunnels, she would come up to you and touch you and tell you that you were going in the wrong place. He also would see flashes of her red cape and white uniform when in the tunnels between Bolton and Bar. He learned about her story from an older attendant who worked there. The 1950s saw the max population at Central State peaking at 2,500 patients of all ages. There was at one point 58 pediatric patients being cared for at the hospital. By the 1970s, the old Victorian buildings were considered unsafe and obsolete, so many of them were razed in favor of brand new brick buildings. In 1974, 3 new state-of-the-art buildings were constructed, the previous mentioned Evans building, but also the Bar and Bolton buildings. This, however, did not curb the mistreatment, abuse, and horrific treatment of the patients in the facility. Public awareness grew over the mistreatment of asylum patients around the country, and starting in the early 1980s, changes were made in the institutions. More pharmaceuticals were used to treat mental illness, resulting in fewer patients being admitted. Restraints were reduced, and more attention was paid to treating the patients instead of confining them. Funding shortages in the early 1990s ultimately led to the closure of Central State. The state of Indiana closed Central State in 1994, preserving the pathology lab to be made into the Indiana Medical History Museum, which can be still visited today, although you do need a reservation to do that right now. The rest of the facilities were abandoned and put into ruin, heavily policed by Capitol Police. Between the closure in 1994 and 2011, when redevelopment started, urban explorers and visiting officers were the witnesses to various reported paranormal phenomena. And this is where a lot of our urban legends and folklore about the property actually comes from, this portion of its history. The old hospital grounds were used for anti-terror or other safety training exercises conducted by the Indiana National Guard, police, or fire officials. During these training exercises, officers reported feeling cold spots, seeing glimpses of figures, and hearing odd shrieks and moans in the hallways. Groundskeepers have witnessed former patients floating across the lawns at night or phantom crying in the hallways. Because although it was no longer being used as a hospital, the state of Indiana still maintained it. So there were people on the grounds, upkeeping, mowing the lawns, and all of that in the buildings the entire time, which is why the different officials are able to use it for training operations, because it was still usable. There was still power. It was just, instead of thousands of people on the property, you maybe had 10 plus the museum. As of 2022, only 4 buildings stand on the original campus: the 1886 power plant, the 1895 pathology building and the smaller dead house next to it, the 1895 laundry building, and the 1938 administration building. The administration building, however, has been gutted and retrofitted into modern apartments now called Central State Mansion. The Indiana State Archives, the Indiana State Library, and the Indiana Medical History Museum are preserving the history of the institution that served the mentally ill in Indiana for over 146 years. Currently, the Indiana Medical History Museum with Ball State University archaeologists are working to preserve the graves of former hospital patients. The movement to give the voices back to the patients who lived at the hospital is led by Indiana Medical History Museum Director Sarah Halter. They are working to identify and memorialize those buried in the cemetery since so many of the records and headstones have disappeared with time. The cemetery is actually divided into two sections with tibs running between them. With so many decades of trauma and death, the former Central State Hospital is renowned for its paranormal activity, some calling it the, the location, the most haunted place in Indiana, and it probably is. So that is my book report on Central State Hospital. It is by far the most well-known haunted place in the state of Indiana, besides the Hacienda restaurant. So
And
what
you
do
have
you
been
think?
there?
I
Have you been?
never managed there.
So you
Nope.
never went there at all? Okay.
No. I had the opportunity to in 2014, and
Uh-huh.
I ended up moving to Rhode Island before I could go.
Oh.
Mm.
So I had been invited to go on a guided legal tour of Central State,
Mhm.
and it was supposed to be in September of 2014. It was 2015, and I moved to Rhode Island in August of that year.
No.
So
Oh.
it was so close, but and then by the time I came back, everything was either condemned or razed.
Mm.
So
Oh,
like
that's
the
too
Winnie
bad.
the Pooh story went down in 2011. So, the documentary, Dan's documentary that he did was back in 2008, and it's some of the last footage of the buildings before they were razed. So, yeah.
If you
Oh.
want, we can talk to Christine about it. She was there past couple years.
It would be great to get
Hey.
Christine on to do a follow-up on the story, and I know a lot of people in Indiana did manage to visit. So I'd
Mhm.
love to have a lot more first-person, uh, discussion about what people saw and encountered while there. I know I have visited psychiatric hospitals before, like Penhurst is one I mentioned during the reading. That and then another one that's in New York that, or no, also in Pennsylvania that I just blanked on. Besides Anchorage, where we've been, that also
Mhm.
was a nursing home, not quite psychiatric, but dementia patients were there too.
Yeah,
Um, so
overstaffed or understaffed and overcrowded.
every single one of them to this day, is they're not staffed high enough.
No.
It's
Oh yeah, and they're
kindergarten.
building more and more of them. They just built
Yeah.
two.
Yeah.
They're building another one on North Bench, less than a mile from our
You're
house.
kidding.
And there's already a ginormous one they opened about a year or so ago.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just housing. I mean, so I guess it's a problem that's ongoing. Like people are always trying to figure out. I mean, it actually segues a little bit into our hometown haunt because
Mhm.
the house that they lived in, and I don't know if it has so much to do with the story, but I think it was Troy's mother's great great grandfather was in chains up in their attic because now he would probably be diagnosed with dementia. They thought
Yeah.
he was crazy. People didn't know what to do with people that had dementia or illness, and so it was, I suppose, either chain them up in their attic or send them to
Aw.
these institutions. It seemed like not a lot was understood about a lot of
Well,
this.
Yeah,
no.
It's still
it
not
was
understood.
Right.
it still really isn't. Before really I'm gonna say the 1920s, it
Hmm.
was people were chained up because they
Mhm.
didn't know restraint was the only way they could treat them. And I
Mhm.
will say, people with, um, some forms of dementia can get very violent as,
It's
I
true.
know.
It's true.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's, my mom routinely beats up her aides. I can only laugh about it because there's no way to kind of
You have
process.
to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just thinking of my mother, and I'm not making fun of her in any way, but
Mhm.
she's a fall risk now. She has no strength at all, but her trying to throw a punch at one of these younger 20-something aides is in my head just like, yeah, that it has to be like a mosquito hitting a
You
cement
hope
block. It's not
you would
gonna.
hope they see it coming and
Yeah.
can at
I
least
think it's a very frequent thing. I think from their
Mhm.
standpoint, the person with the dementia,
Mhm.
they feel like they're being assaulted. I mean,
Well, yeah.
Yeah, they're
they don't
They don't know what's
confused.
going
understand
on.
necessarily what's going on, and
Yeah.
they're in a sort of a fight or flight mode.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
and that's when you discover if they fight or if they flee,
or
um,
freeze. That's
or
also a
freeze.
response.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another one, deer in headlights. Yeah,
Mhm.
with my mom, she cycles it takes about 15 minutes at max, and then she'll cycle again with the conversation topics,
Mhm.
and, she can get disoriented and confused very quickly.
Yeah.
So, I can understand why it happens. And I can only imagine if there was absolutely no medication happening and your family
No.
member has dementia
Yeah.
or another member, or sorry, friend of the family, she has schizophrenia
Hmm.
No.
and she is medicated for it, but she knows when she's about to have issues when suddenly like it gets really light out and everything almost looks in this weird halo effect.
Oh,
Mhm.
And
interesting.
yeah, so she's like, "Oh, no, I'm gonna go call my doctor now,"
Oh.
because she'll have, just breaks from reality. I I know she was found outside of her house many years ago, just walking around, completely disoriented.
And that
So
happens to a lot of that's why they restrain them because they would get hurt or walk
Right.
away. I mean, a lot of
mhm,
times because they didn't know where they were going, they may not even be able to,
Find them.
yeah,
mhm,
they may not know how to respond or how to get
Yeah.
somewhere,
mhm,
and I think it happened enough that people are like, "We don't want you wandering off," and
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
it's so I can understand, but it seems like as much as these institutions, it seems like they always have the same story that they're understaffed and the people treated badly.
mhm,
I mean, one wonders if there's ever going to be a solution to this.
yeah, I will say modern medications have helped a lot. It
Hmm.
stabilizes a lot of people. It's not 100% fix, of course, but it really does treat a lot of issues before they become worse. It's not it at least from my experiences, it's just
Hmm.
helped a lot. It's much better than lobotomies, which
Mhm.
were, oh my goodness, the
Yes.
That
It
was
was
the
traveling
very
worst,
lobotomist and all that, and then, electric shock therapy, which was also practiced there.
and it's
Uh,
still practiced actually.
Yeah, apparently it's better now than it used to be,
Well,
but
better is, you know,
what
well,
tips?
I think sometimes it does help people
mhm.
jolt them back, but I'm hoping it's
They don't
not still
understand
used.
scientifically what it does. They've
Yeah.
compared it to, like, when your TV wouldn't tune in and you would hit it on the top and
Oh
you'd get,
god.
like, some
Okay.
improvement. That's kind of what they compare electroshock therapy. That being said, it's still done because it does have some people report good results and say it
Yeah,
helps them.
that's
But
true.
it's one of those things that they don't totally know what it does, and they don't it doesn't, and for some people, it doesn't help them,
Yeah, it's
you
not for
know?
everyone, but
True.
for some people it helps,
Yeah,
and it's
and
kinda
so it's for people that it's a last resort, really.
yeah, like medical
Um,
leeches still exist,
mhm,
but it
Well, they
and
use
metal
maggots too.
yeah, I was about to say
Yeah.
medical maggots are still around. So
Oh,
some
mhm,
of those things do work. It's just not everyone needs electroshock therapy,
at
just a
least the
uh-huh.
small
bugs are
percentage.
Well, Carrie
natural.
Fisher got electroshock therapy,
That doesn't surprise me. She probably
and
didn't need it though.
she used to have an answering machine message saying that, "I may not know you because" because a
Aw.
lot of
Oh,
times it makes
geez.
you forget.
Yeah.
Too.
Wow.
But and I think with her again, it's where you have issues where nothing seems to be working, so you're desperate and you're willing to
Yeah.
try
Yeah.
something. I think she had some efficacy, but I don't know. There's several articles about it you can read about, her.
Yeah.
I mean, she struggled a lot of her life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
I think like as far as the understaffing issue, like we knew it was coming with the boomer generation,
Oh
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
then they need to keep up with the correct training of
mhm.
people. to
Mhm.
accommodate that, but not everybody wants to go into that field. So like how do you get the right people to take care
There's a
of your
lot of people who want to help. There's
parents?
like talk to people who are in nursing training or have become nurses. They just
Mhm.
innately do want to help people.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
just they also need to be fairly compensated for the amount of work that
True.
they're doing.
True.
Agreed.
Like,
Agreed.
I will happily pay all the people taking care of my mom as much as they need to keep doing
Yeah.
it and be happy,
Yeah.
and also appropriate vacation time and
Mhm.
time off because you do need to step away from that
Well,
caretaking.
yeah,
And
because
it also, and some states are doing better too, teaching family members how to caretake for their
yeah,
elderly and giving benefits that
Mhm.
way.
yeah,
And that's how we do it safely, because I know I would have liked to have some caretaking tips for when I had to take care of my mom,
yeah,
Mhm.
but when she started getting violent, I didn't know what to do.
yeah.
And
Mm-mm.
there isn't there are things for that, there are just not enough organizations for that.
Mhm.
Gotcha.
And there's actually an article that was on Huffington Post not too long ago that was basically warning the millennial generation of this is the biggest tide of change you're going to see is all of your parents becoming elderly and needing caretaking,
Yeah.
and no one is prepared for it because we don't have
Mhm.
enough doctors, we don't have enough nurses, we don't have enough aides, we don't have enough staff, and we're going to have this influx of, as you said, the boomer generation coming in who need it. Dementia's being diagnosed far more frequently now. There's
Mhm.
more varieties and at earlier stages.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's these are specializations, and even the people who specialize in it are starting to retire. So it's just
Oh
it's a
no.
terrible catch-22.
Yeah.
And I don't think institutionalization like what we see here in the Kirkwood
Mm-mm.
plan, I don't think that's gonna work again,
Oh God,
but
no.
no, but, definitely
But
more support is needed.
they definitely are building lots of facilities like them. I mean, these places are huge.
They're also
I
for
mean,
profit, and
yes.
they're not I don't know, I don't have the best experiences with them right now, so
Well, it's interesting because there's something I was watching the other day talking about private equity firms buying a bunch of these nursing homes.
yes.
Oh, that's great.
It's very
Um,
scary.
it's not good. Um, that's a whole different discussion. But
It really
but
is.
then you end up with situations not that different from this. I mean, maybe I should keep an eye on the one next door because we might be investigating that in 10 years for all the ghosts there, for all the
Mm.
I mean, it
Yeah,
looks new and shiny, but what it looks like doesn't matter. It's what's the care like.
yeah. I do remember ghost hunting friends of mine that did visit Central State, and it wasn't easy to do, I'm gonna say legally with permission. There
Mm.
was many, many people that would break in, not that I knew, I will say that were urban explorers.
Mhm.
And it's kinda like with the old Ohio penitentiary that was in downtown Columbus, not to be
Mhm.
confused with Mansfield.
Mhm.
People would break into the not the reformatory, the penitentiary there, and they would encounter ghostly phenomena. Now, was it the homeless or people that were without shelter? I don't know, but
Mm.
people would see apparitions walking down the hallway wearing the hospital gowns.
Oh, wow.
People would hear moaning, people would hear screaming, and one of the things I learned from a friend who was a nurse when I was investigating Penhurst was when you're doing EVP sessions, asking questions and giving choice to the people who could respond is amazing because patients there were not given a choice at all. You got whatever food was available. So the idea when we went into the pediatric wing and we had candy and we could say, "Do you want butterscotch or would you like peppermint?" We got a whole lot of activity over the voice, the audio recorder, because suddenly the kids that were there, and unfortunately there were kid spirits there, were like, "Oh my gosh, I have a choice. I don't
What
have
did
to
they
choose
usually pick?
butterscotch." Was
Really?
good for
Butterscotch.
them. Yeah.
Interesting.
Hey,
You
butterscotch
know,
is delicious.
Although I have
But
to
I
say I like butterscotch better than peppermint, but it's less
mhm.
available.
Yeah, it's less available. It's not so trendy, I guess, anymore.
I
Everybody's
like
doing peppermint,
butterscotches.
but at
I
any
can't
rate,
I can't help but wonder the kids that are in places like that parents were just dropping them off because they didn't understand them,
Well, it could have been
couldn't handle
autism.
them, or
Yeah. A
Yeah,
lot of stuff
and
wasn't understood. It's still
it
not
wasn't.
understood.
oh yeah,
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 it's yeah, it wasn't understood very well. And families, it being a caretaker of anyone who has anything that is limiting them,
it's not
um,
easy.
it's not easy, and you
Mhm.
can get tired. And if you can imagine, a lot of the families in Indiana at the time were farmers or
Yeah,
ranchers,
yeah,
and that's just another mouth to feed. So
yeah.
we're going to send
Mhm.
them. A lot of these institutions started at poor homes, as we talked
Mhm.
about in a previous episode. And this one did not. This one was purposely for those who needed help mentally.
Mhm.
And they brought in the superintendents. If you read the list, they were interesting people that were enlightened and were trying to help people, like the man who set everything on fire. There was a big push in the late 19th century to get away from this restraining and more to talk therapy, not quite
Mhm.
Freudian, but a lot of dialectic therapy where you're trying
Mhm.
to, or the physical occupational therapy with taking care of the farm. So you had patients who would be harvesting apples or the corn or whatever
Mhm.
that was in the garden. They would be doing that. That would give them something to do. There was a belief in if patients had occupations that they would feel more inclined to heal themselves, which,
That sounds
they're
very
not gonna get
Republican.
healed, but more direction. And, it I'm just imagining sorry, I'm imagining my mom trying to pick apples right now, but
Well, saying that's always an argument. Oh, well, if they just had a job, things would be better.
yeah,
Right.
there's very much that argument, but
Yeah,
I
that's
totally
always
get
been
where you're
around.
coming
Very
from.
Puritan.
Yeah, from all of the patients that were able-bodied to do that kind of work out in the field, not in the fields. It wasn't there was 100 acres, but I'm saying, like, out in the
On
field,
the grounds.
on the ground, like,
Yeah,
eating apples, stuff like that. They'd be out there for a few hours doing it.
yeah.
Mhm.
I can
Well, maybe
see
they
how
were at
that
least
could
tree
be much
breathing.
more stable, being
Mhm.
able to go out, see things, not being stuck in your room, not being shackled to a wall, not
Mhm.
being shackled to the tunnels. That's a much
Mhm.
more pleasing way to be outside.
Well,
It's
that's.
probably really oh, go on, Jen.
I was gonna say that's what it was like in Mansfield. Um,
Mhm.
they put the prisoners to work.
Mhm.
They
Mhm.
farmed, they did a whole bunch of things, and
Mhm.
then
Free
one
labor.
guy came along one day and it's like this cruel and unusual punishment. The court agreed with him, and then after that, they got to sit in their cells 24/7.
It's a really complex issue because I think one
Yeah.
of the things that's hard is because of whatever is ailing somebody, whether it's dementia or certain types of mental illness, is I think is the people have very unpredictable behavior, and
Mhm.
Right.
that's what makes it difficult to treat because you might send a bunch of them out apple picking and then they all start, like you said, punching each other or
Mhm.
get in a fight or
Bonking them on the
do
head with an apple.
something or wander off or, something like that.
Yeah, it's like the now, I will be honest, I did not find any records of an inmate stoning or bludgeoning another inmate to death.
Oh, good.
That seems but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, I just wasn't able to find it.
Mm.
Mhm,
And, yeah, it's that is that unpredictability that is scary.
mhm,
It's because according to patients who were there and staff, they would hang out in this courtyard, this grove area, and, just enjoying the sunlight, and then according to the story, one day, one of the more manic patients got out and bludgeoned somebody to death in front of everyone,
Yeah.
and, no staff were able to get there in time to keep it from happening,
mhm.
and it
Yeah.
it goes back to why are these places haunted? And, I know in the documentary, you had one of the psychics going, "Well, it's a place of trauma." It's like, yes, it's a place of trauma, but it's a way of remembering what happened there so it doesn't
Mhm.
get repeated again.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's really
Well, and
it's
especially patients that are schizophrenic or having a reality break, you don't know what they're seeing. You don't
Mhm,
know why he went up and murdered that other man. I mean, he could have thought the guy was trying to kill him,
mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
and that is what's scary,
Well,
because
and
you
that does
can't
happen to
see through
dementia
their
people.
eyes.
Like
Mhm.
my uncle that just passed away in October, he thought, like, my aunt went out to lunch, and I don't know if it's that he was watching Fox News and it got him, but he thought that she had been kidnapped. And of
Oh
course she wasn't.
no.
She was
Mhm.
just going out to lunch with some friends. But that's
Mhm.
just but with the dementia, it's, I guess, aptly named. Like, they don't,
Mhm.
like, your brain's not working normally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of disassociation that happens,
Yeah.
and, yeah, your brain is not working normally. And there's
Hmm.
different types. There's
Mhm.
Alzheimer's that a lot of people know about, but then you have, I think it's pronounced Lewy body dementia. That's the
Oh,
one
that's
that
what Robin Williams had.
yeah, and
Oh,
it
okay.
works very fast, and it will kill somebody within 6 to 9 months.
Oh my god.
And, yeah, and you that one is, it I shouldn't say the families that have people with Lewy body are lucky, 'cause they don't have the years of watching their family member deteriorate. But
Right.
it's also very hard because it's very hard to ever prepare yourself for losing a family
So it's
member.
like a rapid.
It's a
Uh,
rapid decline of everything.
Oh
wow.
man.
So, it's
Oh man.
friends that have had it and were and their parents that have had it, they were fine, and then within months, they're unable to walk, they're unable to string, sentences together. One that happens a lot is, forgetting words or
Mhm.
verbs and things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Then you get hand tremors, you become unable to walk, you become bedridden, and it's just a decline very quickly.
That is
Mhm.
Um,
awful.
and then you also have hallucinations that can happen,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
like, my mom at one point left a stove on and with frying eggs,
Oh
and
no.
if it wasn't for our neighbor at the time who noticed the smell of burning and ran into the house and turned off the stove and put out the smoldering eggs that were on the stove, that could have been something very bad, but my mom
Yeah.
got distracted.
Yeah.
Something happened, and she just walked away from the stove. So, I'm that was scary. Sorry, I'm just kinda using this as a weird therapy session. I didn't mean to
No,
do that,
that's
everyone.
fine. You know, also that missing show I was telling you about, a lot of
Mhm,
the people that went missing, especially the young people in their 20s, um, I think a lot of it, they may not know if they haven't been found, were having onset schizophrenia or some sort
mhm,
of mental break because of the way they were acting before they went missing.
mhm,
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
like there was this one young lady, she um was arrested and the jail released her. And a lot of the questions were, did they treat her fairly,
mhm.
ethically, morally, or whatever? Because then she went missing and they eventually found her
Is this the
remains.
California case?
Yeah.
Yeah, where she, like, spent a lot of money at a restaurant
Hmm.
and then was walking back, and then they
And she
eventually
had money in her car,
mhm,
and
Hmm.
and one way I think is because cops are not necessarily trained to recognize those behaviors.
mhm,
They really don't know the person, so they
mhm,
can't really make an honest judgment. But at
Yeah.
the same time, if you have any inkling that the person is mentally off,
Mhm.
why let them go? They
Mhm.
gave her the choice to
mhm,
stay, and she chose to leave, and then that's how they covered their asses, basically. I I don't know. It's just, and like there was another case of a kid, there was something obviously wrong to his parents, the way he was talking and interacting with them over the phone.
mhm,
Multiple people before he went missing were talking to him, and every time somebody else talked to him, he sounded fine. He was fine. And then he ended up missing, and I don't think they ever found him, but he was having some sort of crisis,
mhm.
and
Mhm.
they just never knew. He wouldn't
Well,
tell his parents for whatever reason. And he
mhm,
would just tell the cops and everybody else he came into contact with that, "Oh, I'm fine," you
mhm.
know?
Oh, interesting.
So how do you recognize, is that someone making a decision and doing something because they know something you don't, or are they truly having a mental reality break?
Yeah,
How
and
do you
that
how do you protect them then?
yes,
You can't.
and well, yeah, that's a difficult one.
Yeah.
That's where the,
Although
advocates
I do
that
think the
are
cops should have just kept that girl.
Well, this case happened not in Indiana.
I know. I'm
Um,
sorry.
yeah, it's all right. I understand you. I have been binge watching cold case files, so yeah, I
Mm,
understand.
okay.
Um, but yeah, it's interesting. The advocacy definitely will help
Mhm.
and go a long way. We've
Yeah.
seen way too many um, stories in the news about people who were having psychological breaks or
Mhm.
kids with autism who are just being completely misunderstood
Right.
and bad
Being
outcomes
shot.
happening.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that did not happen here.
No.
So
Sorry.
bringing it back, it's all right. Um, yeah,
No,
it's
just
interesting with the ghost stories.
yeah.
It's who's being seen is
Right.
interesting. Who's telling the stories, I find
Mhm.
interesting. The
Yeah.
fact that, like, I had never heard about the story of the red lady
She
until
sounds
watching
cool.
this documentary, and
Yeah.
it seems to
I
be
love the
something that
cape.
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm like, that is a wonderful that actually lets us really kind of dictate through fashion history when this lady was around,
Uh-huh.
because the cape wearing and the skirt is a very 1930s to 1950s
Yeah.
And
uniform,
it needs to come
and
back.
it's very cute.
Were they normally red? Like you never really hear ghosts of wearing red. It's always like white or black or gray.
True, true.
Well, this unfortunately I did not look up before the show, but what I remember is there was a uniform that was in the 40s, maybe the 30s, where it was more of a capelet. So
Mm.
it only went to your elbows,
Hmm.
and you would wear what would be essentially a tighter shirt with a pencil skirt. So, or a skirt with slightly more room to move. And then you would wear a lower heeled shoe
Hmm.
that
Mhm.
was more like a loafer, and those were all white. And then you would wear the little white cap, and
Hmm.
then your capelet would be white and it had like a red silk lining inside. So with him describing the red cape, I realized that's what he was describing was this kind of stereotypical
Hmm.
nurse uniform from the mid-century,
Mm.
basically.
Hmm.
And I find it interesting that the people who were always encountering her were other nurses and orderlies working at the hospital. It
And
wasn't
she was trying to
patients.
help them.
Yeah, it was always other nurses and orderlies.
Hmm.
So I found that fascinating who was telling that story and retelling the story to the younger generations
Yeah.
within the group. Also, officers going and doing the anti-terror raids and stuff, they would
Hmm.
use the old building. The administration got used a lot as well as the powerhouse. And they were encountering hearing people moaning, hearing people crying, cold spots, hot spots, disembodied voices, disembodied footsteps, and then
Mm. Wow.
full-on apparitions walking through when no one was supposed to be there. And it's the
Wow.
fact that these are the people who are trained to basically react or not react in a panic situation, and
Hmm.
this is what they're seeing, and this is what they're telling their buddies.
Yeah. I'm
Fascinating.
hoping they weren't using live rounds or anything.
N I don't think so.
Okay, good.
There were never any stories of somebody accidentally being shot on the campus during a
That would
drill.
Um,
happen now.
Yeah,
yeah.
but it was kind of funny listening to some of the paranormal investigators talk about their time because 'cause they're like, "Well, we found random flashlights and random fire hoses, and maybe
Huh.
people accidentally left them there when they saw a ghost," and I'm like, you do realize that this is used for, like, anti-terror exercises, right? This is probably gear that a team accidentally left behind, not
Mhm.
Totally.
out of shock, because they just forgot it.
Forgot. Yeah.
So it's interesting seeing who's telling the stories, who's receiving the stories, and the urban explorers, of course, had the most fantastic stories of the full-on apparitions, chasing them down hallways, making cold spots, the shrieking ghost in the grove, and I'm like, of course it's the urban explorers seeing the most extreme stuff because they got to keep that story going.
Yeah.
So the fun, and I say this fun in a weird macabre way, is the medical museum. I did not find any ghost stories associated with it at all.
Hmm.
And they even have the morgue next to it. They have the dead house Next to it is the second building. So technically, they have two buildings on the property, and the dead house is set up to be a morgue as you would have seen it back in the day.
Oh, wow.
And it
I kinda
was,
wanna go there now.
yeah, I really encourage people to go. Please make a reservation and go visit it. It's on reservations only, but because they have to restrict how many people are allowed in and all that. But they do have specimens in formaldehyde. They are
Ooh.
taking a lot of stride trying to identify all the organs and who they may be parts of.
Oh.
So I'm like, wow, I'm
Ooh,
hoping
can
those
they
types
DNA
of,
test those?
I don't know.
Maybe not
Um,
because of formaldehyde.
I don't know how much formaldehyde would have broken down the cellular structure of
Mhm.
DNA because
Hmm.
these are pieces that have been around for decades in
Yeah.
formaldehyde.
Mhm.
I am not I did
Sure how
not
that
get to
works.
that
That's something we can
forensic
look up.
lesson in anthropology to tell you that. So,
Okay. You
um,
know, it's funny because I was going to ask you what is a dead house, and you must have been reading my brain.
it's kind of, from what I can understand, I will be honest, this was the first time I encountered the term dead house.
Mhm.
From context, I took it was the chill room where they would put corpses once somebody had died
Gotcha.
before they actually worked on them.
Okay.
It was kind of funny seeing in the documentary the psychic run into an embalming table. It
Oh.
felt like for the first time. Um, I'm sorry to drag on this documentary a little bit, but she's looking at it and she's like, "Terrible things happened here. Oh my gosh, it's so much dark feelings." And I'm like, "It's an embalming table, a nice porcelain one, in fact." Yes, I guess bad things happened here. They were
Depends
trying to
on how you
figure
feel
out,
about embalming.
yeah, and the amount of organs that the medical museum have that have cancer on them is amazing.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
I was listening to one of the interviews, and the director was just like, "There are so many specimens of cancer on these patients' organs. So one of them is as big as a small apple." And I'm
Wow.
like, "Oh my goodness." That the pain from having cancer, that would make a lot of people lash out.
Well,
Yeah, they
yeah.
didn't really have treatments for a lot of stuff.
They didn't. Like, the lucky ones got it diagnosed and ma removed in surgery, but good luck if you
Maybe.
survive the gangrene afterwards. So,
I was gonna say surgery was pretty grisly in the 1800s.
I'm
yes,
so glad we live now.
I know, I know. I mean, the idea that anesthesia is a thing is a very welcome.
yes. When
Yes.
it works properly, it's a wonderful thing.
You know,
So,
I'm just
Exactly.
thankful that I am not one of those people that wakes up from anesthesia.
Me
yeah.
too. I'm not
My
either.
sister is one of those kind of
Oh,
Ooh,
like
yuck.
she kind of needs a little bit more than I would need because the few procedures I've had done, I'm just out and there's nothing there when I wake up.
Mhm,
Don't remember a
mhm.
thing. And
They
I
don't
love it.
totally know how anesthesia works. They don't know how it turns off the brain or anything.
mhm.
They're
Yeah.
still that's one of those things that was like a happy accident, and they still don't totally understand.
Yeah.
Well,
Drugs are
I'm
good,
glad it's well.
okay?
But
So,
we
Christina,
have a yeah.
we have a hometown haunt on that
Woohoo!
note.
Oh, real quick, the video or the documentary we can watch on YouTube?
Yes, you can.
Okay, and it'll be in the
It
show
is
notes, correct?
it
Yeah, we can put it in the show notes.
Okay.
yeah, it is, sent oh, yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. Go on, Christina. I can't I just had a brain fart, and I can't remember what it's called. So, please
Well,
go
our
on.
hometown haunt is from my mother-in-law, Patty, and she was telling me this just over the holidays because we were talking about, the podcast and stuff. And she said that, and this is from her view, she says, my mother and aunt always talked about a ghost cat that they had in their house. They said that they would feel something rub on them at night, look in their faces, and lay on them. And it really scared them because of the myth that cats suck out one's soul. And they had never had a cat that whole time they lived there, but when they moved in, there was a lot of cat poop in the house. So cats had apparently lived in the house at one time. And I also referenced that this is the same house that their great great grandfather uh, was chained in the attic, and they used to think they could hear chains. So that was an earlier haunt we talked about where people heard chains and that sort of thing. And she said Now they would have probably thought he had dementia. They thought he was crazy, but he had dementia. And again, they didn't know what to do with people. But I don't think that has to do with the cats. But when I heard the story, it made me think of the creeper more than the cat.
Yeah.
Because they felt something, and it wasn't another person. They felt something,
Tasting them, see if they were good for
yeah,
dinner.
sitting on them. And I wondered what cats' reaction would be to this. Is this a common thing? And was it probably ghost cats?
Oh, let's see.
Right, let's unpack this.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. It does remind me of the creeper from Benninghofen
That's what
estate.
I thought when I heard the
Yeah.
story this time.
The
didn't think
fact that it would
cats.
look at them, I want to know what they saw. Like, could they, in their mind's eye, did they think it was a cat or did they think it was
They
something
felt it
more?
was like something nuzzling up to their face the way cats do.
Okay.
Our cats don't do that. I should say that, um, but she says they didn't say that they ever saw anything, but she's going to ask her aunt, and
Mhm.
who was one of the eyewitnesses, and see if she remembers.
Did they feel suffocated at all?
Well, it freaked them out. Like they
Yeah.
thought but I guess the size and the mass felt like a cat,
Mm.
but it did scare them.
I'm going
The
to go with it was a ghost cat and it accidentally scared them. Like,
Okay,
that wasn't the intent, but that's what happened.
Kitty just wanted cuddles.
Yeah.
Mm.
because saying it's a creeper makes it much scarier.
Making it a creeper makes it way more scary and adds a whole new dimension to it, but I would like to hear the follow-up on the accounts with this story. So, I'm going to say ghost cat for now, but I wanna hear more. It reminds me of I have my own ghost cat stories, 2 of them actually. One of them was from growing up. It was around 10 PM at night, and my mom was watching TV, and I was finishing homework, and I stayed up all night, basically. I was a night owl. And I remember her screaming for me, and I came running in, and I could see the imprints of cat paws climbing up the bed because it was wintertime and she had all her comforter on. And you could see it was the perfect, that kind of quarter size that the cat paws would be
No, we
on a
see that
bed.
on our bed all the time when they walk on the comforter.
Yeah. And that's what our cats did. But we had just lost Gracie to cancer.
Aw.
And it walked up, she could feel it hop onto the end of the bed near her feet. And then she could see the imprints of Gracie's feet go up to her lap. And then it just
Aw.
stopped and felt like it sat down. And my
Aw.
mom was freaking out because she was startled. And
Yeah.
I was just like, "Mom, it's Gracie.
Yeah.
Don't freak out. She's just saying hi." And she was just like, "Okay. Yeah."
Mr.
And
People.
yeah, Mr. People. And then the house that I had in Cincinnati had a ghost cat in it. I watched it walk through broad daylight in the middle of the morning while I was getting my coffee, like let's say 9 AM. Watched this orange and white tabby just walk right through my kitchen and went up the stairs. And I was just like, all right. This was before we had our rabbits, but we did not have our dogs at the time, and our rabbits did react. They freaked out. They ran away to the other side of the room and hid in their little boxes.
Oh my
Rabbits kinda
gosh.
freaked out with everything, so it was kinda hard to say if it was the cat or just them being rabbits, but, it was very strange, and we only saw that cat once.
Huh.
It just walked right
It's just
through,
passing through.
A
just
ghost
passing
cat.
through, and that was definitely the vibe I got from it, was just I'm gonna call him Gus, and Gus was just like, "I'm just passing through, bye." So, there was that. So I'm gonna say ghost cat, and
Okay, but hopefully, her aunt will have some eyewitness accounts of what this was.
yeah, and I hope so.
Hmm.
And, all right. I think
Maybe a creeper is just a really demented, angry cat.
it could be.
Hmm.
It
Yeah,
really
but it's
could be.
probably still alive when that happened.
Well, okay.
Yeah,
So when Betsy goes cat, you'll have to tell me if you see her around me.
sure. I will do that. Don't
She's
worry.
she's 20-year-old kicking it. She's still
She's still there.
hanging in.
She's there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She
hopefully
doesn't-
she'll still be there when I visit in March.
Fingers crossed.
All right.
And hopefully she won't make you
Yeah.
suffocate.
All right. I miss cats. Like, I miss being able to cuddle with them while sleeping.
Mhm.
My
Yeah.
Mhm.
cats used to sleep on my head, and then they would stick
Yeah.
their paws in my mouth. It really took me up.
We have not ever had a cat that sleeps on our heads. They almost always
Oh,
sleep at our feet.
I did.
yeah. No.
Betsy, when she's on the bed, she'll sleep next to me by my pillow.
Mhm.
I had a cat mouse. She would sleep on my head, on my
Yeah.
pillow.
Aw.
And Mr.
Yeah, I don't know if
Kitty,
I've
I used to have a Mr. Kitty. He would sleep right here
No.
every
Yeah.
Aw.
night. Yeah.
Canuck would always sleep, like, right in the crook of my neck and head.
Yeah.
Aw.
She was
Aw.
always cold, especially in the wintertime, so that's where
Yeah.
she would go. She'd go
Mhm.
underneath the covers and just sleep right there.
Yeah.
So and
Mhm.
now I can't do that, though I will say Yeti, the 60-pound dog, has no problem trying to fill that void, except for he's much bigger and heavier, so he's kinda crushing.
You've got your own fur blanket
I do
with
have
those
my own
Exactly.
three. You
blanket. It
really
was a
do.
3-dog night this past weekend, so
Wow.
on that note,
Mhm.
everyone, you can send your own ghost stories, urban legends, and creepy cryptid stories to our email hometownhauntedmail@gmail.com. Also, give us your input on tonight's episode. If you've been to Central State, please let us know. If you saw anything creepy, please let us know. If you think we're full of hooey, yeah, you can please let us know. I may agree with you. You can also follow us at Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities on Instagram, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook. You can join our Facebook group, Hometown Haunts. So, for Jen, Christina, and myself, thank you for joining us this week, and stay spooky. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.